There are moments in life you don't realize are changing you. Dramatic music, the world doesn't stop. The sun still comes up, and people still go to work. Traffic still moves. To everyone else, it's just another day. But for you, it's the day your life splits into before and after. For me, that day started like any other work day. At that point, my wife had already moved out. She was staying at her mom's already, and she had the kids with her that day. So when I got off work, I wasn't expecting to come home to a house full of people. I already knew it wasn't going to be. It was just going to be me. Normally after work, I'd head to jiu-jitsu. The gym became a place where I could clear my head, forget about life for a little while, and just focus on the next round. But that day, I didn't go. Something told me to just go home. So I did. Pulled in the driveway, sat in my truck, grabbed my things, started walking up the steps. Unlocked the door, and the second I walked inside, something felt off. I wasn't surprised the house was quiet. I expected it to be quiet. I knew the kids weren't there. I knew my wife wasn't there. The silence wasn't what caught my attention. It was the feeling. The feeling you get when you walk into a place that you've been in 1,000 times, but somehow it doesn't feel like a place that you've left that morning. That's what this felt like. I couldn't explain it. Nothing jumped out at me right away. There wasn't one big moment where I instantly knew what had happened. It was just this feeling that something wasn't right. I remember standing there for a second, looking around, almost trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was overthinking it. But I couldn't shake it. So I started walking through the house. Not because I was looking for anyone. I already knew nobody was supposed to be there. I was trying to figure out why it suddenly didn't feel like home anymore. As I walked from room to room, I started noticing little things. Something that used to be there wasn't, then something else. At first, my brain didn't even notice and connect the dots. It was almost like I was seeing everything without actually understanding what I was seeing. But with every room, with every step, the picture became a little clearer. And deep down, I think my heart already knew the answer before my mind was willing to admit it. I just wasn't ready to accept what I was about to realize. I don't remember exactly which room I walked into first. I just remember walking. One room after another, looking around, trying to figure out why everything felt different. At first it was little things. Something that had always been there. Wasn't a picture, a toy, a blanket. You notice something's missing, but your mind doesn't immediately think much about it. You just keep walking. Then you notice something else, and then something else, till all those little things start adding up. I walked into my son's room. It didn't look like my son's room anymore. The things that made his room were gone. The toys that had been scattered around, gone. The little things that as a parent you almost stop noticing because they've always been there, gone. Then I looked in my daughter's room, the same thing. The things that made it feel like her space had disappeared. It didn't happen all at once. It happened piece by piece. Every room answered the question I'd been asking myself since I walked through that front door. Why does this house feel so different? Because it wasn't just quiet anymore. it had been emptied. That's when it finally hit me. This wasn't about my wife moving out. That had already happened. This wasn't about the kids spending a few days somewhere else. I already knew they were with their mom. This was different. Their things were gone. Their rooms weren't waiting for them to come back after the weekend. Their lives had been moved somewhere else. And in that moment, the reality of everything finally landed. It wasn't just going through a divorce. It wasn't just adjusting to living alone. I was stepping into a life where I wasn't going to wake up and see my kids every morning. I wasn't going to hear them playing in the next room every afternoon. I wasn't going to tuck them in to bed every night. Not because I didn't want to. Not because I wasn't their dad anymore. But because our lives had changed. Overnight. Fatherhood became something measured by a custody schedule. By weekends, holidays, calendars. I remember just standing there, trying to process it. Thinking about all the little moments that I'd always taken for granted. The bedtime routines, eating dinner together, helping with homework, hearing them laugh from the other room. The random hugs, the little voices yelling, "Dad!" You never think those moments are limited, until one day they are. That day, I wasn't grieving a house. I was grieving the life I thought we were going to have. And that's the kind of grief it's hard to put into words unless you've lived it. Because nobody prepares you for the moment you realize your children didn't just leave the house. They've started building a life somewhere else. And now, you have to learn how to be their dad in a completely different way. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe it was a few minutes, maybe longer. Time has a funny way of slowing down when your heart is trying to catch up with reality. I just remember looking around that house and realizing there wasn't anything left to convince myself of. The rooms had already told the story. The silence had already said everything that needed to be said. My life wasn't on pause. It had changed. And that's the moment my mind went somewhere it had never been before. I wasn't thinking about the marriage or the house. I wasn't thinking about who was right or who was wrong. I was thinking, what kind of dad am I supposed to be now? Because nobody teaches you how to become a part-time dad. Nobody sits you down and explains how you're supposed to go from seeing your kids every single day to counting down the days until it's your turn again. Nobody tells you how much you'll miss the little things. Not birthdays or Christmas. Everybody talks about those. I'm talking about the ordinary moments. Helping tie a shoe before school. Listening to tell you a story that doesn't really make any sense. Hearing Dad, watch this. Making dinner while they're arguing over something that won't matter in 5 minutes. Stepping on a Lego in the middle of the night. Those are the moments you don't realize you're going to miss. Because they're just life. Until one day, they aren't. I think that's something people who haven't lived through divorce don't always understand. The hardest part isn't always the big moments. Sometimes it's realizing you don't get the everyday moments anymore. You don't get to be there for every scraped knee, every bedtime, every school morning, or every spontaneous hug. Those moments belong on a calendar now. And I hated it. Not because I wanted control, not because I wanted to fight, but because I love being a dad. I still do. Being a father has always been the most important role in my life. That didn't change because my marriage ended. If anything, it became even more important because I knew my kids were going to need stability. They were going to need someone who kept showing up. They were going to need a dad who didn't let his pain become their burden. And I want to be clear about something. This podcast isn't about blaming my ex-wife. It isn't about trying to convince you that I was right. Every story has more than one perspective. Mine is just the one I lived. What I can tell you is this. I made mistakes. There are things I wish I had done differently. There are conversations I would have had, and I wish I could go back and have those conversations. There are moments I wish I could relive with more patience, more wisdom, or more gratitude. But I can't. None of us can. What I can do is decide who I'm going to be from this point forward. Because my kids don't need a perfect father. They need a present one. They don't need me trapped in yesterday. They need me becoming a better man today. That realization didn't erase the pain. It didn't make the house feel full again. But it gave me something I desperately needed in that moment. A direction. Because if I couldn't change what had happened, I could still choose what kind of father I was going to become after it. I wish I could tell you I walked out of that house with a plan. I didn't. I wish I could tell you I knew exactly what the next year of my life was going to look like. But I didn't. The truth is, I walked out of that house with more questions than answers. How was this going to work? How would I see my kids? How often would I get to see them? Would they think I left? Would they think I didn't want to be there? Would they know how much I loved them? Those are the questions that started running through my mind. Not because anyone had told me they wouldn't know, but because that's what fathers do. We worry. We carry things our kids will probably never know we carry. I remember thinking about all the little things I was going to miss. The random hugs, the evenings after work, hearing about their day, watching cartoons while pretending I wasn't watching too. Just the everyday things that make up being a dad. It's funny. When you're living in those moments, they don't seem important. They're just normal life. But when they're gone, I realize those ordinary moments were the ones that mattered the most. I wasn't worried about vacations. I wasn't thinking about birthdays or Christmas. I was thinking about Tuesday, a regular Tuesday. Coming home from works and hearing my kids in the next room. Asking them how school was, making dinner, helping with homework, or telling them goodnight. Those were the moments I realized I was going to miss the most. Because those moments build a relationship. Not the big events, the little ones. 1,000 ordinary moments that happen between birthdays and holidays. And now, I knew those moments were going to look a little different. There would be days when I'd wake up and my house would be quiet. Days when I'd want nothing more than to hear my son ask me 100 questions, or my daughter come and find me and just tell me something that could have waited until later. Days when I'd look at the calendar instead of just walking down the hallway to their rooms. That realization hurts. It still hurts sometimes. But somewhere in the middle of all those questions, one answer became very clear. No matter what changed, I was still their dad. That title wasn't decided by a custody schedule. It wasn't decided where they slept. It wasn't decided by how many days I got. I was still their father. And whether I saw them every day or only on the days that were mine, I wanted them to know exactly who I was every single time they walked through my door. Someone who loved them, someone who was present, someone who never stopped being their dad. Because I couldn't control how much time I had, but I could control what I did with the time I was given. Looking back now, I can honestly tell you that that wasn't the hardest day of my life. It was the day that changed the direction of my life. And there's a difference. The hardest part wasn't walking through an empty house. The hardest part wasn't seeing empty bedrooms. The hardest part wasn't even realizing their things were gone. The hardest part was accepting that fatherhood was going to look different from now on. That every decision I made, every holiday, birthday, weekend, or ordinary Tuesday was going to be different than I had imagined it would be. I didn't get a choice in that. But I did get a choice in something else. I got to choose what kind of father I was going to be. Was I going to let my hurt become the thing my kids remembered about me? Or was I going to become the kind of dad who made every minute count? I wish I could tell you I answered that question perfectly every single day. I haven't. I've had bad days. I've had days where the silence got to me. I've had days where I questioned everything. I've gotten angry. I felt lonely. I've had days where I wondered if I was enough. And if you've ever had those thoughts, you're not weak. You're human. But here's what I've learned. My kids don't need me to have all the answers. They don't need me to pretend I'm never hurting. They need me to keep showing up. They need to know that when it's my time with them, they have all of me, not half of me, not the distracted version of me, not the bitter version of me. Me, their dad, that's become my goal. Not to be a perfect father, not to somehow erase what happened, but to make sure that every time my son and daughter walk through my front door, they know they're walking into a home where they're loved, where they're safe, and where their dad is grateful they're there. Because if this journey has taught me anything, it's that we don't always get to choose our circumstances, but we do get to choose the legacy we leave our children. Maybe you're listening to this today and you're in your own quiet house. Maybe your kids just left. Maybe you're just counting down the days until you get to see them again. Or maybe you're at the very beginning of this journey, wondering if you'll ever feel normal again. If that's you, I want you to hear this. The silence you're living with today doesn't get the final word. The divorce doesn't get the final word. The worst day of your life doesn't get the final word. You do. Every time you decide to answer the phone when your kids call, every time you show up on time, every time you keep your promise, every time you put your hurt aside long enough to make them laugh, every bedtime story you still get to read, every hug and I love you, those moments still matter. Maybe even more than they did before. That's why I started this podcast. Not because I've figured life out. Not because I'm an expert. I started this because I know I'm not the only father who stood in a quiet house wondering what comes next. And I want every dad listening to know Your story didn't end. The day your life changed. You're still a father. Your kids still need you. And as long as you're still breathing, there's still another chapter to write. Thank you for listening to Dad After. I'll see you in the next episode.